So where is the mirroring options? No, it would be one of the clickables. Try the calendar. Just see if it's hiding under that for some reason. Nope. Let's stop seeing. If I can read trees so much. Let's see here. For display. So scroll over to the monitor and then click on arrangement.
Oh, that one. Oh.
Mirror displays, there it is. Ta-da! There we go.
Okay, so
I think that will have to do.
It's the best we can do. You can do view full screen.
so let's say you don't have to do
Okay, should we send it around or?
Let's give them 3 more minutes. We're hitting the usual straggler problem of last session. It's technically time to start, but we'll give them another 3 minutes. I do not expect many more people than this.
No.
is that just like
It's a sort of interesting observation is they give us room sizes based on attendance, which means if they bias any session towards a Friday,
That's it. Yeah.
and I don't think they include that in their statistics. It's like a Monday session, you get a lot of people.
It's hard to say.
someone who hasn't been
Greg is in here.
following this closely and gets this up 2 years from now. and goes,
Yeah, I don't know if he's still here.
How can I?
Considering that he's one of the main presenters. It'd be good if he showed up.
Michael. Maybe we should have promised free beer or something.
I think people are beered out at this point. It seems to be easier to get attention to get beer than it is to get water around here. Spent the entire week sort of mildly dehydrated.
Did you go to the bits and bytes? Yeah, you were there. You were there. So a little bit.
I stopped in to grab food. I ended up getting nabbed to go talk to our friends at Deutsche Telekom.
Okay.
It's happened a couple times this week. He's like, a little bit of time, just, nope, no relaxing time.
Great.
It is a good time to start. Get started. Good afternoon. Welcome to the very last session on a very long week. Thank you for showing up. This is BFD. If you are expecting something else, then you're probably very, very confused. Start the blue sheets around. I think we can probably just.
Yeah. Not sure. 50. Yeah. Good.
I don't suppose we can get one volunteer to help with taking minutes on the Etherpad. Thank you, Ignis.
Thank you again.
I will be watching the Jabber room, so we're good for that.
Next.
So I'm going to go ahead and let's see. Actually, the camera's on us, so I'll just stay here. Okay, so let's go through our working group status. This is our typical note well. At this point, you've seen this a lot of times this week. I will also note that the working group chairs are making a push to try to get more reviewers for our various documents, get people involved earlier. So if you have some interest in becoming more involved in the active editing process of IETF, please let us know and we'll help you do that. Slide. So in terms of status, we actually hit a nice milestone the last couple of weeks. The Seamless BFD work did publish, generating RFCs 7880 through 7886. Several of those RFCs were the minor extensions to things like OSPF and PALs to be able to be used inside of Seamless BFD. A further bit of work is, we've prodded the working group multiple times regarding the BFD MPLS bid. The work in there actually is correct, but there is, not a strong set of interest to drive the work forward. We've spoken to Alvaro, who's our AD, about dechartering this work. And if the document ever becomes interesting again, we can obviously move it forward. But as part of our next charter update, we will likely end up removing this from the charter. Another piece of somewhat lingering work is BFD multipoint. It's certainly ready for working group last call, and we just mostly need to move forward in the publication and review request. What I'll be suggesting at this point on the mailing list is that we look for one or two reviewers for things to just go through the document, see how it is, potentially sign them up as the document shepherd, and actually proceed with working group last call. Now, we are aware of at least one implementation of the base BFD multipoint document. The active tail document is used by Trill, so at some point it's going to become a normative requirement for them as well. One of the things that's sort of an interesting lingering point for our work in authentication is that the CARP working group, prior to their closure, had provided a series of recommendations for various protocols to actually close off security issues within those protocols. Their recommendations to BFD resulted in 2 documents. The first one was a generic keying piece of infrastructure that mostly provided for the ability to do key agility, be able to do rollovers of keys mid-session. This is something that BFD cannot currently do, and honestly, given how fast BFD is done, key rollover is actually a very difficult thing to do. That said, we have been given the impression from multiple implementers that BFD security is not currently a popular feature. It is deployed, it is used by some people, but it is not heavily used, and the level of security is not considered very high at the moment. The secondary component that was recommended from them was a profile that allowed for SHA-2 HMAC to be used as part of BFD. Both of these pieces of work are seen to be well reviewed, pretty solid, but at the moment, just sort of low interest for deployment. Upon discussion with Alvaro, one path we are considering to take this stuff forward is that we may actually want this stuff at a later point in time, and it should actually be seen to have gotten IETF review. So our inclination is to look for document shepherds, work our way through the working group last call process, and publish these documents as experimental rather than as proposed standards. Do you have any commentary on the current status? Okay, next slide. So future work. Our charter, for some strange reason, didn't actually have Yang on it. We'll need to close that off. In terms of clearing stuff out, we also have some other things that are making use of the authentication. A couple of those things we've seen before, and at least we'll get an update on this session. We have a small amount of lingering open work beyond the items that are under the authentication bucket, and past that point, we don't currently have anything that is interesting. This happens periodically with BFD. Once we finish the initial work that resulted in 5880 through 5884, we actually went into hibernation for a while. The purpose of the BFD group beyond that point is really to just simply provide guidance to other working groups that want to use BFD technologies, and we keep on seeing novel things show up. Just as an example, the VXLAN work that is being presented to MVO3, the EVPN work that we'll be seeing today. We're not seeing work that is resulting in changes to the base protocol. This is more deployment considerations, and thus having BFD as a review working group is a reasonable thing to do. And of course, if we actually have novel work for some strange reason come up, then the working group can become active again. No comment? So in terms of presentations today, we're going to have a quick review of the BFD Yang module. We're going to be going through the current BFD authentication module for being able to do optimized authentication. BFD stability is going to get a very brief update, which I'll be presenting since Mahesh was not here. And then Greg will be covering 2 items, one of which has already been reviewed in EVPN. And also he'll be going through a multi-chassis lag, micro BFD as well. And you're going to comment on Lime maybe?
I'm sorry?
Was Lime actually going to show up at the?
Yeah, so I had we had also had discussions with the Lime group that, the Lime connectionless model, which was presented in Lime, there'd be presentation here because there's some kind of crossover between, MPLS, LSP ping, BFD, and Lime. So.
Any agenda bashing? Okay, seeing none, we'll begin our first presentation. And I believe Rashad will actually be doing the presentation for the Yang module.
Yes. me to get up or?
Yeah, why don't you go ahead and stand in the box? Here.
Good afternoon. My name is Rashad. So I'll be presenting the progress which has been going on the BFD Yang model. The authors of the draft are on that first page, and I believe only Greg is the other person here, or maybe Vero, I'm not sure. Anyway, next slide. So when we last met in Yokohama, there were a few issues which were described about 8 months ago. The issues which we discussed then have been addressed, or mostly addressed, in the latest revision of the draft. One of the things we kind of went around in circles for a while was because of the different configuration models in the industry, where sometimes BFD is configured centrally, sometimes BFD is configured in the routing protocols. After lots of back and forth between us and the routing guys, we went back to having all the BFD configuration under BFD as opposed to under the routing protocols. There were a few reasons for that, which were described in Yokohama, and I think the slides from there spoke about that. The second change was we had one single big model which tried to address all the things BFD runs on. And right now it's been split into multiple models. For example, we have a model for IP single hop, for multi-hop, for MPLS-TE, for lag, and that kind of stuff. And as we have the Yang model for more technologies on which BFD runs, then we'd be having those parallel models. And the other thing we had was for BFD over MPLS-T, you typically configure BFD over a TE tunnel. A TE tunnel can have multiple LSPs. There was no way for us to represent that purely in BFD except by importing lots of the things which were defined in the TE model. So we decided to augment the TE model. We have the config per TE tunnel, but the BFD session is per LSP. So for example, you could have an active LSP and a backup LSP on a TE tunnel, and you would have config on the tunnel, but you would have operational state on each LSP. The other change we did was regarding the authentication. We had our own kind of authentication scheme, and now we're using the keychain, which is in the routing workgroup draft. And one of the other issues we had in terms of making progress is some of the modules we depend on. There's been lots of lots of churn. If you've been attending, whether it's NetMod or routing workgroup and all that, there used to be routing instance. We decided in Dallas to be VRF centric. And then about, 3-4 months ago, the routing instance was gone. It's been replaced by network instance, which I'll be talking about soon. And one of the other things was that the Yang validation tool and the website that Benoit runs used to be using Pyang only as validation tool. Pyang is good for certain things, but it doesn't detect certain errors like XPath errors. And one of the things which was done in the hackathon and prior to that is Carl has changed his tool and Benoit too to use confd compiler, which detects XPath errors. XPath errors, I think, are the most common things when you do when statements or must statements that, Pyang does not detect. You easily forget a dot or have an extra one. So we had a couple things like that which we had to fix. Next slide, please. So what is currently not covered? So BFD over VCCV is not covered. I think that's the next thing we have to look into. The L2VPN Yang model is now or will soon be a workgroup document. There had been a fair amount of churn. I think the Yang doctors had a bunch of comments. So now that that's kind of firming up, I think we can look but having BFD for pseudo wires. The second thing was BFD over MPLS-TP. When the design team was meeting, we initially said that we would not cover MPLS-TP, and because that seemed to be low priority on the T model. But maybe Greg, you can, I believe you are working on a model for MPLS-TP now? Or?
Yeah, well, not actively working yet, but that's an idea, yes.
Okay. So we'll have to talk about whether we discussion on the list or, whether we address that immediately or whether we wait for the TP draft to be more advanced before we tackle BFD over MPLS TP.
Okay.
There's no RPCs right now in the model, and the question to the room is, my take is, so the usual stuff people talk about is clearing of counters, statistics and stuff like that. But I've heard others say that, we should not be doing that because then you screw up your controller, and the controller is doing the delta for you. So that's an open item.
Yeah,
I think it's not just a BFD decision. It's across the routing area. Whether what's the guidelines for this?
The only other probably use of RPC could be if BFD echo.
What do you mean?
When you want to send BFD echo on demand to trigger BFD echo. It's similar because BFD echo effectively it's a ping, self-addressed ping. So you want just to do it for certain duration.
Well, I think that's something which might be implementation specific. Some implementations do it all the time. Some may do it on demand.
Okay.
So we can go on the list on that. If it's something which is common, I've got no issue with it being in the base draft.
No, I agree. I query on the list and see there.
And one thing RPCs might actually be used for is depending on exactly how the Lime work actually settles out. This may be a way to expose procedures for Lime to make use of in their model.
The other thing we were ignoring at the beginning of the design team is seamless BFD because we said, we're only tackling RFCs. Well, seamless BFD isn't, there's a bunch of RFCs, as Jeff said. My, immediate take on this is that we don't need any change in the model because there is no change to the data model itself, but that's something else which we can take on the list and could be for further study. Next slide, please. Open issues. So after the routing instance, compiled failures, I took to augmenting network instance. But this week I've had some discussions with the netmod guys, and the routing config model, and I think what the netmod team is pushing is that. So one of the discussions we had at the beginning was, some implementations of BFD are VRF aware. There's routers and about VRFs. You configure BFD in VRF. Others might be simpler nodes, which are maybe transport nodes, and there's no VRFs. So I think that question has arisen for other protocols, and what those netmod guys are pushing for right now is you define BFD, you don't augment any routing instance or network instance, but you have it schema mounted based on your implementation, whether it's at the top level or in the VRF. That's the last take I got from the netmod guys, but I think this is something which is going to be up for further discussion. We've had ongoing discussions. There was discussions yesterday in the Lime work group as there's the Lime connectionless model, which was presented again yesterday. I think there is some maybe mismatch in the views as to how the OEM protocols use Lime. I think the Lime view is that protocols like BFD should be augmenting the Lime model. I think those OEM protocols might have the reverse view. We had some discussions yesterday, Greg, and Michael. I don't know if you guys had further discussions, but Michael is going to be present, so we can have that discussion when Michael presents the Lime connectionless model. And I think it's something we'll have to discuss further on the list.
Actually, since you brought the interrelationship MPLS-TP OEM model and BFD, because BFD foundation for CCC-VRDI, the same exists through MPLS-TP onto connection-oriented YAG Lime model.
And there's a couple of issues which the convd compiler is complaining about, which I don't have a good grasp on what's the error, and I've contacted them to see what should be done. So if you go to Benoit's page right now, you'll see that Pyang is happy, but convd compiler is not. And I believe this is it. Any other questions? Thank you.
Okay. And the issues that we're running into in terms of the standard NetMod models, the schema mount, that sort of thing, is issues that every single IETF group is facing at the moment. So this is not anything that's blocking our specific work. This is us just dealing with what the current state of the matter is. Okay. If there are no further comments, we'll move on to optimizing BFD authentication, which I'll be presenting for Mahesh. Tall people.
Good.
Okay, so the purpose of the BFD optimizing authentication feature is to try to take care of at least one of the obstacles for BFD authentication being deployed, and that's namely if you're using any sort of meticulous authentication, the amount of CPU that is burned by the authentication operation tends to be a little bit more than what you can do in most of your line cards. And since we're operating in a resource-constrained environment, looking for more clever ways to make use of the resources without burning them up strictly for authentication is something that's under evaluation. Mahesh and company had done a nice draft where the fundamental idea was that once we reached the up state, we only periodically do the signing, and we actually don't bother to sign a number of things. The document right now really has had no substantive changes since the last time it was presented. The security implications about leaving it in this form where we're not always working through signed packets was the main consideration we had to work through. The request from the security directors was that we should actually go talk to the SAAG people to see if they had any considerations. Next slide. So we had breakfast with some of them on Monday morning, and the commentary that we had received, from the two that showed up was, this is back to the proposed solution. Again, we authenticate on state changes only. When we're up, once every second, we'll send an authenticated packet. That will not necessarily be a state change, and it's mostly to just make sure that we aren't subject to man-in-the-middle types of attacks. Next slide. And the breakfast that we had Alan Deacock and Randy Bush there, and for the most part, they seem to be generally okay with the idea, especially for the problem space that BFD is attempting to handle. Greg, you had a comment?
Yeah, actually, the question. I sent the question to the list before the meeting. So if we are sending single authenticated packet among their stream on non-authenticated packets, I can imagine, for example, in hardware-assisted implementation, authenticated packet will be shipped for check to their control plane. Mm-hmm. So in the meantime, if we have very short interval, non-authenticated packets will get in, and that will be resetting that timer.
Possibly. So, and I think the piece of the procedure that does need to be spelled out is that in the window where you're expecting an authenticated packet to show up, there needs to be potentially an extended window longer than the detection multiplier to say the session is actually supposed to be up or down.
Yes, exactly. That's where I'm driving. So that specification of how failure to authenticate impacts the state machine, it needs to be spelled out.
I would agree. And as we see here, they were generally okay with this idea of leaving things, partially unauthenticated. Alan did add an additional suggestion that we use something other than monotonically increasing sequence numbers. This allows us to avoid some of the predictive attacks that we have. So based on having some sort of key, an algorithm would be used where the sequence number is predictable by each side that has the key. without allowing the item in the middle to just simply spoof it out. So in cases where a signing operation is not actually being done, there's some level of protection still being given by having an idea of what the actual sequence number would need to be. So the sequence number to some extent becomes really a secret sequence number, and this helps mitigate some of the attack space. Alan was going to actually suggest us a couple of algorithms that should be able to be done in fairly constant time. So in terms of the next steps, the draft has been stable for a while now. This is a useful feature. This does help us with our scenarios where we want to deploy stronger cryptographic mechanisms. One way to actually approach this is adopt it, and along with the other authentication work, try to do it as a batch. This is again from the working group status, not something that has traditionally gotten a lot of interest in the working group, and interest among operators is modestly low. But the problem with security stuff is the interest for it always happens long after the fact. If you don't have the feature and a security issue becomes known, having a solution in RFC somewhere is actually a useful thing. So the authors are looking to have the working group adopt the document and potentially last call it relatively soon thereafter.
Okay, I do agree that this is interesting work, and the document is reasonable for adoption, but before the last call, definitely need to sort out this impact on the state machine.
Agreed. I believe this is the last slide here. So any further comment on this proposal? We will be taking adoption to the email list just as a attempt to get some general working group and just show of hands. Don't need a hum for this. Who here thinks this is actually work that the working group should take up? Okay, we show a couple. Ask the other question: who here thinks this is work that the working group should simply not take up? No show of hands. Thank you. And
Stability?
the stability one. Were you presenting that?
I think that's you.
I think it might be doing that one too. Okay, so again, I'm playing virtual hash. Just as a brief update on the BFD stability. I'll show off the authors. So again, this was an attempt to make use of BFD to measure the stability of a link. This is not being used to actually take a session down. This is simply where you actually want to use an existing stream session that's going across the link to try to detect periodic disruptions. And the main purpose is to see if there's some form of loss. This is obviously not meant to replace mechanisms such as CFM. This is meant to be a supplementary mechanism. In terms of the mechanism, this was, again, take advantage of the fact that we have sequence numbers going across authentication and watch for drops in the sequence number packets just to see if things are there. And that way, if you happen to see a loss of a certain number of packets, this gives you some level of statistics. The general idea is that we want to use sequence numbers. We could use cryptographic mechanisms, but honestly, that's just going to slow things down. So part of the proposal does include, as you see on the bottom point here, a null auth TLV. This is simply there to make use of the existing cryptographic general header. Next slide. So they've mostly just done some text polishing. They have done some cleanup in terms of reusing the null auth and trying to share it among the optimizing authentication field. And the packet delays been put as an implementation detail, specifically how it's actually done. Beyond that, it's out the scope of the document. Draft is stable, and they're looking for working group adoption. Again, while this actually fits in the authentication bucket of work, since it actually touches that feature, this really is a standalone feature for trying to actually detect packet loss across the BFD session. So we'll take the question for adoption to the mailing list, but again, could we see show of hands in the room, who thinks this is actually worth adopting? Okay, we show a few people. And similarly, question, who here thinks that we should not take up this work? The what? Microphone, please.
No, I just missed the first question. Can you repeat?
First question was, who thinks we should take up this work? Okay, one more hand. Okay, that was a brief presentation. I think we're ready for Greg.
What are you presenting first? MCLAG?
Whatever is on top, too.
Okay, yeah, next slide. So in 7130 addressed important operational issue of monitoring constituent links of a LAG, link aggregation group. Yes, there is a way to do it in CFM, but implementations that I know about, they're non-standard. So with interaction, with cooperation from IEEE, IETF managed to resolve that how to run on the sub-second intervals on the individual constituent links. So effectively creating a set of identical sessions with different discriminators. And usually you run it with the same time interval. But we realized that the solution proposed in 7130 does not address their MCLAG scenario. So when you have the head end and you have redundancy group. So you want your lag from their head end to work seamlessly as with the normal lag. So basically to see the redundancy group as a single node. Next slide, please. So in this, there are two proposals that are very small, and one of them addresses when we do IP encapsulation. So in IP encapsulation, we're proposing to use either multicast address or use a local broadcast. Next slide. Okay, and if we are in IP MPLS network, then encapsulation of BFD control packet could be either with IP header or with ACH encapsulation. So if it's IP header, then associated channel will be used to indicate whether IPv4 or IPv6. And IP address will be destination, so to prevent the routing out. So it's 127/8 address family. With ACH encapsulation, we identify it as BFD. Next slide. So that shows that how it looks with UDP-IP encapsulation. And if it's ACH encapsulation. The reverse path could be either directed, should be directed over MCLAG links, because for Ethernet services, you want them to monitor it in-band. And the same encapsulation could be used there as well. That's it.
Okay.
So, Rashad, question. So, when you say in the reverse direction, you mean from your PE to your multi-home
Right,
PC, right?
Yeah, from redundancy group to the head end.
Okay. Is there,
Because you want to monitor, it's a single hop, so you want to monitor the service in-band in both directions.
But does the choice of the source, and can you choose the local address on B and C, or are you saying you have to use, I'm not sure I understood your last point where you said you can do the same in the reverse direction.
No, the thing is that, again, it's just a hint to implementation that when you configure on redundancy group, you need to associate it with its specific lag group. So thus you will use the Slack group.
Okay, but the packets from B to A and C to A would be using what source address?
Local source address.
Local
If you're
source,
using,
okay.
if you're using IP UDP encapsulation, then you use your local source address.
So it's my impression that you're looking for this work to actually be adopted by BFD?
Well, we had a discussion around the Buenos Aires, and we were pointed out that it fits, yeah, even though it's kind of somewhere in between, but it fits better in a BFD working group. So here we are.
Okay. And this question goes out to one of our MPLS chairs in the room, Loa. Would you be okay for this work to be adopted within BFD, but since it has a component that obviously is a MPLS one, to have MPLS act as a reviewer for it?
Loa Anderson. Yeah, I better use the mic, otherwise the chairs shout at me without mic. So, yes, I would be comfortable to have the document adopted here. I want us to be copied on the working group adoption mail, and also when you go to working group last call.
Okay, that's very reasonable.
John Messenger. Is this compatible with the DRNI modifications to link aggregation, which have been standardized in 802.1?
So content sensitive?
It's not the time-sensitive networking.
No, content sensitive. Basically, when you can do a pin on a particular constituent flow.
So that's a technical aspect, yeah, but in the link aggregation standard has been updated recently to incorporate these this multi-chassis. Well, it's not called multi-chassis, it's called dual redundant. It's called distributed resilient network interface, not dual redundant anything. This effectively standardizes the dual homed case, and it also standardizes 2 nodes on each side and more.
That's interesting. Well, frankly, I haven't looked at the latest version and how this is applicable. From BFD perspective, this is an implementation detail, and from my implementation experience, I know that we are injecting packets on a raw adjacency. So we're bypassing their aggregation.
So I would suggest that because of the work having been done in 802.1 to handle this multi-homed case, those considerations will have been analyzed and may have been changed fundamentally in the link aggregation. And so I think it would be necessary to coordinate this with 802.1 and not to work independently here. So I would request that you send an email to the IEEE IETF coordination group to bring their attention to this draft, and request that the 802.1 takes a look at it.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks.
And John, I don't suppose we can convince you to sign up as a reviewer to the proposal?
I could review it and I'd be real good at finding the spelling errors. Whether I would have any constructive comment on the details of the DRNI aspects, I'm not entirely convinced, but I can certainly point the right people at it.
Oh, that would be great.
That's great. More eyeballs are good. Okay. So since we're looking for a potential adoption of this working group, again, we'll take it to the mailing list, but could we have a show of hands of people who think this is work that is worth adopting? Yeah, we have a few. And is there anybody in the room that thinks that this is work we should not take up? No show of hands. Thank you. Okay. Moving along to Next
Yeah.
presentation.
Yes.
EVPN.
So third this week and last at last. The work on BFD, application of BFD to EVPN networks been it was started some time ago, then expired, and recently authors got interest to review the proposed solution. And in this document, we started from fresh, so it's not continuation of expired document, but it does compare the proposed solution to the solution that was proposed originally. So thus, we refer to the new solution as alternative solution. But we think that alternative solution has some advantages. Next slide, please. So in EVPN, you have different architectural elements construct. So you need to monitor multi-point to point, point to multi-point, and probably even multi-point to multi-point LSPs. So thus, there is a combination of BFD and of BFD protocols to be used. For example, in the multi-point to point, it's a point-to-point BFD, and in point to multi-point, it's obviously the BFD for a multi-point network. But in addition to that, the question is, so how you identify the scope of your BFD session? And originally, the proposal was that to use the same encapsulation, of course, with the GAL label, as being used by the corresponding traffic type. That creates a lot of complexity and probably unnecessary overhead. So thus, we propose to use another alternative. Can we go to the next slide, please? So which uses ACH encapsulation and provides the context in TLV, which follows BFD control packet. And that can be done either for unicast traffic, so with the MAX sub TLV, or if we go 2 more slides further, or inclusive multicast TLV for the BOM traffic. So that's effectively the proposal. Yes, it's a 0.0 version. There are a lot of things that we need to do, and one of the big items that we're planning to work next is the bootstrapping of BFD sessions.
Okay. So we do have Jabber comments from Prasad. I wanted to first ask for some commentary on both alternatives, which you proceed to go into a little bit. His second bit of commentary was that he personally thinks that there are merits for the first form of encapsulation, i.e. use the L2 header inside the GAL GASH payload. Anything further, Prasad? One more request. He was looking for comparing the consistency of BFD EVPN and BFD for VXLAN.
Yes, that's if we go further, next slide. Yes. So in BFD VXLAN proposal, it was proposed to use for VNI 0 as identifier of the target. And we discussed, because we have some common set of offers of 2 documents, and just before their Berlin meeting, we entertained the idea of considering this ACH encapsulation to be used for BFD over VXLAN.
So I have some questions and comments. Some of them I put on the list already, and we spoke about in the BESK meeting. So I think the draft doesn't explain very well in the alternative proposal that there is no IP header, or maybe it does, but not in every place. That's one thing. I think also to clarify that the LSP ping is needed only when in the second proposal and not in the first.
Right. Yes. Thank you for the comments. I appreciate it. We plan to address them after the meeting and respond. Yes. The proposal currently assumes that we're using ACH encapsulation, so thus there is no IP source address in BFD, and part of the bootstrapping, whether it's with LSP ping or some other means, because, for example, was interesting discussion at the BEST, they have a proposal to use BGP for the bootstrapping, to distribute discriminator through BGP. Yeah, it came a little bit as a new idea to me, but it's interesting, and we asked them to share this with the BFD group for review, because there might be some conflicts if you starting LSP BFD with your LSP ping, and then you send with the BFD with a different discriminator, then you might end up with very bad situation. So that has to be considered and very carefully, so not to create race condition and mutual exclusion in a control plane. But yes, so basically for EVPN, there some BGP can play some bootstrapping role.
Well, I think the comment they made was, since BGP is used anyway for the NLRIs for EVPN, it seems to be, I mean, it has to be discussed on the list, but it seems to be a logical place to.
Right, but that has to be correlated with the current practice of bootstrapping BFD session over LSP.
Yes, but that would make it a bit more similar to seamless KBFD, right?
Depending, yes.
Yeah.
Yes, right. So basically, yes, you're advertising your discriminator. The only difference here is that you're advertising root advertises, for example, in case of the BOM, but the same needs to be looked at as in case when you need to have a point-to-point.
So obviously, this one has some interesting question about where this document lives.
Right. We asked the question, we didn't ask the question to MPLS group, but asked the question to BEST. My personal view that it's somewhere in between MPLS and BFD, more than BEST.
Whereas the conclusion that I'd come to for my reading is that the encapsulation issues, push it a little bit more for BEST in terms of how this is meant to be utilized, whereas it has a review requirement from MPLS. There's not much in the way of actual changes to BFD itself.
No, right, that's correct.
So this may be one of those cases where BEST may be the primary first home for the document, and we can get review for the other two working groups.
Now we have them to agree to that.
Okay, so this sounds like a conversation should kick off with the chairs of all three groups.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you.
Quick show, who has the blue sheets, and have you not signed the blue sheets? We have a couple of people in the back corner, so whoever has the sheets, if you could forward them back.
You can go through the connectionless model.
Okay. And there's also a comment from Prasad that he has no preference for the homes of which working group, and that either BEST or BFD is fine. And the last presentation of this IETF will be a quick overview from the Connections OEM model from the Line Working Group.
What time did you send it? This one?
Yeah. I'll try it again.
I
中心也大准。
Okay. Hello everyone. My name is Michael from Huawei. Today I want to introduce this ARM connectless OEM Young module briefly. Since we have in the Yokohama meeting, we are talking with Lime group and receive a lot of comments as we split this model into split the basic model into two modules, one for connection-oriented and another for connectless. And we have do a lot of work to build this connectless OEM Young module and presentation it in the Buenos Aires meeting. After Buenos Aires meeting, we have held two inter-meeting to discuss this connectless OEM Young module. Lime working group chair and Greg help us review this document and give us a lot of question and suggestion. According to this suggestion and email discussion, we take the top-down method, replace the bottom-up method. Therefore, in this list region, we define a lot of several reusing blocks, building blocks, including several reusing grouping and extensible type. Another is we defined a retrieving method, such as some RPC blocks, and for this technology-specific OEM Young module, perhaps we can pick up the relative building block to extending this, this technology specific Young module. You can look at this module design in the backup size. Next slide, please. Okay, we have introduced this connectless OEM Young module update in the Lime working group and some online and offline discussion. So in this meeting, we clean up the passive performance measurement attribute from the connectless OEM Young module, and now we close this passive OEM Young open issue. So the next step, we will call for adoption this connectless OEM Young module in the Lime working group. Okay, this is basic connectless OEM Young modules update. Okay, thank you. Any question?
No, thank you for presentation. What sort of assistance are you looking for from BFD at this point to take model forward? Obviously, BFD is just one of the components that you're looking to use inside the model. Mm-hmm. Where do you see future interaction with the working group?
Okay, in this Lime basic module, in this version we use choice case nodes to distinguish different type or different test points location list type. So that we design this model, we both consider reusability and extensibility. So this choice case node is real extensible. So technology specific OEM can choose this relative block to extending, or just can add his relative case into this test point, since we have already since the Lime connected module is extended by the IETF topology module.
Okay.
So it builds a relationship with different test point location. So techno-specific OEM YAML module can aid or insert a relative case into this test point choice. So this whole build, so this whole test point locations list can can get together and show the relationship with each other. Therefore, the user can use this line module quickly from what is the default location and switch different test result, put them together. Okay.
It's something which we discussed yesterday, and I think which Greg alluded to also in the Lime meeting yesterday. So there's certain constructs like TE tunnels where the model is fairly complex, and on the config wise and the operational wise, we really do not want to duplicate that tree now. Maybe with schema mount we can do that. I'm not sure. But how do you? Can you say? I mean, I think we spoke about leaf ref or something along those lines. So that's how you think it should be done.
Okay. If we consider the TE network, perhaps in the basic model we don't have a relative test point, but for TE you can add a relative TE's location and use some leaf reference to the TE's YAML module. So it can inherit the TE module's attribute, you mean difficult attribute, and also can provide the the Lambda relationship. Okay.
So, were you expecting mostly to use seamless BFD for this functionality, or regular BFD as well?
For our job now, we just provide this this common structure or retrieve method, and next step perhaps we can align with BFD, and also we talk with Rashad and Greg what to build this for, such as a Lime BFD module or another module to make sense.
Okay. So for the connectionless form, where there may not, this may be on demand rather than pre-provisioned.
Yeah.
Something you may wish to.
Yes, I mean, we define this RPC blocks can provide on-demand method, but also we use this configuration blocks. But you can add some practical attribute into the relative anchor point, and so it can use both practical and on-demand method.
Okay. So this suggests that at some point you may be making recommendations to the BFD Yang design team for some RPCs to be added. Is that correct?
Yep.
Okay. And my last comment is that for the seamless BFD case, discovery of the discriminator is the main thing. Were you thinking that this should be discovered through the IGP, or since your main interaction right now is through the topology model, would you be expecting the discriminator to be in the topology model?
Okay. So why we argument the topology model, since it's we can see the OEM YAML module is a kind of OEM topology, and the topology model can show the different test point relationship, and we also add some relative test point in this module to complete this relationship. Another thing is just Lime want to do is to provide this test point locations relationship, and if it want to if you want to use be used in some technology network instance, perhaps some job in device module design team can use pair mount or another method to mount the Lime module into his network instance module.
Okay.
Like this. Okay. So it's not it's not affects the network instance. It now we have a lot of method to use use one module into in other blocks, you know.
Okay. Is there any further questions? Okay. Thank you for the presentation.
Thank you.
And with that, BFD is concluded for Berlin. Thank you for coming. We will see you on the mailing list and potentially in Seoul if there is sufficient work for us to meet. That will be my usual. I've taken a snapshot of the Etherpad. I will go ahead and get a fresh copy.
Thank you. Good to see you again. I don't think I'll be in Seoul unless BPFD meets. If BFD doesn't meet, I probably will not be in Seoul. Yeah, the one after, because I think around Seoul time I'm going to be extremely busy.
Okay, well.
It's good to see you. Yeah.
Thank you. Thankfully, you have a relatively short trip back home.